Yeah, so my name is Bjarne Schieldrop. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm in charge of analysis of commodities in SEB. I've had that position since 2006. So I witnessed the boom and bust of commodities after the huge industrial boom in China, leading up to 2008, all commodities collapsing, and then again all commodities booming up again, when China stimulated its economy big time to counter the financial crisis, and then of course after that, with lots of commodities falling down. As demand growth started to slow down, supply started to catch up with the market, and prices crunched for several commodities. We've seen aluminum going into huge oversupply and then crunching down towards marginal costs. And what happened in the end is that you have producers taking action and cutting production, and then prices start to rise again. So we've seen the different commodities go through this phase at different stages. Copper hasn't really been through that stage yet. It's still at a very high price, but now we see that supply is catching up, and we'll probably go through a phase where also copper needs to go down into low prices with rationalization and cutbacks maybe in the production side before catching up again. And then what about oil? Oil is a little bit different because you have some kind of monopolies called OPEC on the supply side, which really balance the market continuously to a certain degree. So it doesn't really necessarily go through those kind of boom and bust in the same cycle and the same phase as the oil commodities. I'll start out talking about the increasing supply from North America and the shale oil. And we saw a graph of this just recently. It really surprised many people, not everyone. It has surprised me, but I was talking to people who've not been surprised. And of course, the big question is how is this going to continue? We do see that some of the growth rate year on year is starting to slow down, so maybe it's not growing so much in percentage terms anymore, but it's still growing very strongly. The main expectation has been that it would start to fizzle out and maybe top out in 2014 and start to grow slower. We'll see about that. This is sort of the main foundation of the so-called shale oil production in the US, is that production declined very fast. So in a given month, you get new capacity online after lots of drilling, or maybe 138,000 barrels per day from new wells that you drill. But at the same time, you lose almost the same amount of production from the wells that you already have drilled so far. So-called decline rates are extremely fast. But net, you manage to increase your production a little bit anyhow. And then the question is, how is this dynamics? If you look on one well, you start out, these are slightly old graphs. So here you have like 200 barrels per day in one well. And then after 1 year, you've lost almost like 80% of the production from that hole. Is that bad? It looks like crap. But in a way, it's really, really good. Because it means that if you look at the economics of it, you know that you do some economic activity, you put steel in the ground, you put money down, and then you have all the oil back and your money back within 1 year. And if you compare that to drilling in the North Sea, for example, you go out, you search for oil, you find some oil, you apply for a license to extract it, and then you start to do the investments of infrastructure to extract it, and in 6 years' time, you can maybe start to extract the oil, and then you are in positive numbers in maybe 10 years. You know, so it's a huge time lag before you start to make money on conventional oil in the North Sea, for example, which makes the uncertainty very big. I mean, you don't really know how the world looks like in 10 years. While in 1 year horizon, you can easily hedge your oil production as long as you know that you found oil. So this makes for a very aggressive investment in shale oil. As long as the margin is positive, you put money down. So that is one of the reasons why you have such very, very speedy investments in shale oil in the US and very, very speedy increasing production in shale oil in the US as well. But of course, getting back to sort of the loss of the existing, so if you look on all the holes that we've drilled so far, how much do they decline? If you look on the shale oil production today, the decline rate after 1 month is about 300,000 barrels. So if you multiply that with 12 months, you know, you have 3-4 million barrels of reduced production. Now we have seen that shale oil production in the US has increased by, it has lifted total production in the US by about 3.5 million barrels. But if you now stop drilling today, all that additional supply will more or less be gone in a year if you stop drilling. So you lose it very fast. But still they manage to increase production day by day. And it doesn't look like they've had much of an effort doing it. It looks like it has been fairly easy to achieve it. If you look on new ideas, new productivity, it has been a tremendous productivity growth in shale oil production in the US. So if you look on your left-hand graph here, it shows how much do you get from a new well during the first month. And you see that going back to 2007, it was mostly like 100 barrels a day from a new well. And now you see that the best places, you get 500 barrels. And it's still increasing quite rapidly. And this result of this is that you haven't needed to add so many rigs. You can rely on just improved productivity. Of course, this productivity is starting to slow down lately, because you have done the biggest ideas first, and then you will have smaller improvements continuously over time. But it's still sort of a yearly productivity improvement of about 25 to 30% year on year. So if you manage to get 500 barrels out today, you have like 650 out next year from the same holes. You know, it's really very strong productivity growth, and this is really driving the boost in shale oil production. And we have people over in the US talking to the industry, and they say that due to the productivity improvements, they are increasing the oil reserves they see in the ground all the time. If you look on the pad where they do the drilling, they used to have 4 different drill holes from that pad. Now they have 8. So they can reduce the cost quite considerably by doubling the amount of holes from the same pad, which means reduced cost and improved productivity. So they constantly increase their reserves. If you look on the projections, of course, it has had a tremendous impact on the global market. Indirectly, yes, it's true, the US is not allowed to export oil. And it's still probably the second biggest importer of oil in the world if you include Canada, oil from Canada. But they have reduced imports of oil considerably. I mean, they have reduced imports of oil by at least the same amount as they have increased oil production from shale. So they have maybe reduced it by 3.5 million barrels, plus potentially what they have reduced in terms of consumption. They will consume less now than before the financial crisis. I think they consumed something like 21 million barrels per day before the financial crisis, and now they are about at 19 million barrels per day. So that's also a reduction in consumption. So that's quite a big magnitude of impact, increasing production by 3.5 and reducing consumption by 2. You know, that's quite a big impact on the global market. And this is then, in terms of shale oil, is really sort of the big question. Now you've seen sort of the shale oil here, the light, tight oil, which is saying shale oil, has increased tremendously since the start of 2007, and now it's about 3.5, so it's slightly higher than what you see here. Will it start to ease off, or will it increase? And I think what you see of studies is still that the US Energy Department is still very uncertain about this. They do increase the projections all the time, but they're still very uncertain. They don't know how strong are really the decline rates over time? Because it's still important what you get out of a well after 3 years. Is it zero or is it a little? Because when you have like 10,000 wells, it still counts for a little bit of oil when it's a little bit of oil from all these wells. And it's still uncertainty about the magnitude of the resources available in the US. But in general, what we see from the industry is that they are extremely positive about the resources. They adjust them higher and productivity increases further. So in that respect, maybe one should expect to see supply of shale oil from the US to continue to surprise on the upside, rather than disappoint. That's one. And the other thing that was also highlighted by the International Energy Agency is that, of course, this technology is going to spread around the world a little bit at least. It's not as fast as in the US, at least a little. And we do see it now starts to impact into the crossing over into Mexico, where some of these resources are stretching from southern US and into Mexico, and they are starting to cooperate with the Mexican government to extract it there as well. So at least it looks kind of optimistic for the shale oil business. And then the question is what do the investors do? What do the oil companies do? Do they like it? Let's see, this is the one. No. This is the one, sorry. What we see is that if you look on, it has been a tremendous amount of investment in oil production, upstream oil over the last decade. Sorry, this. And then the question is, how much did you get out of that investment? Well, if you look on all different areas outside of North America, it looks like you didn't get much at all. You know, of course you did get something. And if you look on oil production in general, as soon as you start to produce oil from a well, it starts to decline in production immediately. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, depending on the kind of the structure, but it always declines gradually. And estimates of natural decline rates in the global oil production is about between 4 and 7% of the total production, which means that maybe in 1 year of the existing production you lose maybe 5 million barrels. So you need to constantly invest and drill more new wells to counter decline rates across the world. And that is probably what's happened in all these regions, that we've had a tremendous amount of investments. It hasn't been able to increase production much, but it has been able to prevent declining production. So basically maintaining production change. And then what you see in North America is that investments have really increased production tremendously. And then what about reserves? I mean, oil companies constantly look at their books in terms of what do they have of reserves in their books of oil reserves that they can produce from. And as soon as those reserves starts to decline, they need to spend more money on looking for oil. What have we seen over the last years is that, for example, if you look on the EU, these are the amount of new reserves they found, like 9.1 billion barrels of oil equivalents. But at the same time, you've had production of 9 billion, so basically leaving it unchanged over that period. You found more, but you also extracted the same amount. The only place where you actually added to the reserves is in the North America, here on the second part. You found a tremendous amount of new oil reserves, and then you produced some, but net you increased quite a bit. Globally, it sums up that you have a pretty nice increase in reserves for the global oil companies as a whole. But it's either negative or down in all other regions than North America. what we see is that investors are taking their money to North America. They're moving them away from the North Sea, from West Africa, from ultra-deep Brazil, and also away from the Middle East, because you don't want a huge country and political risk in the Middle East. And they're even moving money away from the US Gulf, onshore US and Canada. So it's safe, it's good legal system, it's very high return on money and predictability, because you get your money back after 1 year with a return. So it's very easy decision to do that investment. The worrying thing is, of course, that you see reduced reserves outside of North America. And the question is North America going to be enough? Or do you need continued heavy investments in North Sea, West Africa, Brazil, etc.? And I think it's only demand growth that will decide if you need it or not. If demand growth is very strong, then you will need additional supply from these regions where investors now gradually are pulling away from, or at least reducing their investments. Still substantial investments in these regions, but to a lesser extent and a lesser momentum. What about shale oil in terms of costs? I think I've seen many different estimates of the cost in the shale oil segment. What does it really cost? The latest I saw was from Reuters, saying that shale oil production in the US has a cost base of about $70 to $77. I think the range is probably much bigger. I think the best resources have probably much lower cost. But these are the estimates. And it's also quite scalable. Some estimates for Goldman Sachs is that availability of shale oil in North America is about new capacity of maybe 10 million barrels per day. If you need it and if you want it, at a cost of $80. So $80 comes back all the time. I think if you have a situation like 2000 to 2008, where demand growth is very strong, then maybe shale oil is not enough. Then maybe you need to have substantial investments in other regions, like I mentioned, to get additional supply from there. But if you have a weak consumption growth environment, then maybe you need to move down to the shale oil price level of 70 to 80 to balance on that price instead. I think to understand oil increasingly, you need to look at the other fuels as well. Because oil is really the best. You know, it's called the king of commodities because it's so fantastic, it's so practical. I mean, it's very high density of energy. It's easy to transport. It's easy to fill in a tank, to put in a car. All different kinds of aspects. Oil is extremely practical. And that is why so many people want it, and use it, and consume it, and prefer it over the other fuels. But everything has a limit. And that limit is, of course, price. If it's too expensive and the other ones are too cheap, then of course they will try to use our one if they can. And one of the things that we're living in this era is extremely rapid technology development, making it optional to maybe use all the different kind of fuels, if possible. So here you can see that the growth rate of oil since 2000 until 2013 has been like 1.3, 1.4% a year, compared to almost 4% growth rates per year for coal. So consumption of coal increases much more rapidly because it's cheaper, not because it's better. If oil had been as cheap, you would have had the same kind of growth rate. If you then look on price differences in terms of US dollar per MMBTU energy unit, you see that oil is about 18 US dollar per MMBTU, while coal is about 3. So oil is about like 6 times as expensive as coal, and double the price of gas. You know, and this is why the growth rate of oil consumption is much slower than gas and coal. It's way more expensive. I read a recent outlook report from the NOG BNB looking at the possibility of running ships on LNG, liquefied natural gas. And they said that now, you know, the shipping oil, the fuel oil, the heavy oil, it was usually used only for shipping. Because shipping was called the graveyard for shipping oil. That's where you spent it. But now, natural gas is even cheaper than shipping oil. So they say that if you continue to have this big price difference between natural gas and fuel oil and oil, then you're going to see 1,000 new ships in 2020 worldwide running on energy. This means that if you have a big price difference, consumption growth of oil is going to be attacked. It's going to be attacked by energy efficiency, and it's going to be attacked by substitution if possible. And technological advances and development are going very, very fast. And what was possible today or wasn't possible yesterday. And for example, look at electric cars, still not maybe a huge magnitude in the global market, but probably people have heard about the systems in Norway where we have heavy taxes on petrol cars and no taxes on electric cars, which makes it the best-selling car. Electric cars are the best-selling cars in Norway. It was an ad out in the Norwegian newspaper for test driving the new Volkswagen Golf electric, fully electric, not a hybrid. They expected 600, 700 people to turn up to test it. They got 15,000 people to test it, and they had to increase the opening hours. So things are really sort of moving quite fast, and it's eating away on consumption growth. And that was one of the elements this summer when you saw the oil price starting to move down from $115, was statistics from the second quarter, so showing that consumption growth in the second quarter only grew by 700,000 barrels per day, instead of the projected 1.4, 1.3 million barrels. That was the lowest since the first quarter of 2012. Of course, it has to do with sort of sluggish growth in the European economy, reduced growth momentum in China, etc. But it really shook the oil market that, wow, are we maybe in a much slower growth scenario than we had expected. And here's a projection by BP. Basically it's saying that oil as a share of the energy supply is going to continue to decline. And that is, of course, because it's most expensive. You try to get away if you can. Use gas and coal if you can. And then technology will decide how big is the opportunity to shift away. If you look on OPEC's role in this, here I have depicted demand growth, 2013, 14, and 15, in terms of million barrels year-on-year growth. So in 2013 we saw 1 million barrels increase, then sort of slightly more in 2014, and expected to be 1.3 in 2015. And then compare that expectations of 1.3 million barrels to like 0.7, you know, down here. So what is the game of OPEC? The game of OPEC, you have all the cheapest oil reserves in the world are within the OPEC countries. You know, they have cost of producing new oil maybe $15 to $20 per barrel. If they decided to maximize volume, because they have huge reserves of oil, we would have $20 oil today in the market, like we had before, if they maximize volume. Which means that maximizing volume for a proxy monopolist is never a good solution. So how much can they then restrict supply? Well, if you then look at what are the marginal costs outside of OPEC, maybe you can balance the market around those costs, because the world, they want oil, they need oil. So if we restrict supply to a certain degree, so that the market instead balances on non-OPEC costs. That is ideal world. And that is what their main strategy is, to balance the market on non-OPEC marginal cost or break-even cost. And then the question is, what about $100? We've heard the oil minister in Saudi Arabia say several times, $100, it's good for the consumers and it's good for the producers. And maybe it isn't true. Maybe that you do need $100 in the North Sea, West Africa and Brazil frequently. And maybe it doesn't really hurt the global economy that much to have $100. But if it's way more expensive than coal and gas, and you have options to switch around, and you also have aggressive measures to reduce consumption through energy efficiency, then maybe the headwinds from switching and energy efficiency is too strong for $100. You know? Because at $100, we do see robust supply growth outside of OPEC. You know, we see robust supply growth from North America. So the ideal world for OPEC would be $100, supply from North America is eaten up by global demand growth. And if supply from North America is 1 to 1.5 million barrels, then you need global demand growth to be 1 to 1.5 million barrels as well in a $100 world. But then if consumption growth is only 700,000 barrels, you know, then OPEC will have to cut to maintain $100. And they will lose market share, they will lose total production. They will cut production from 30 million barrels down to maybe 29.5. And the next year they will have to do the same again, down to 29. And the next year again, down to 28.5 to maintain $100. So it's unsustainable in the long run, because they would have constantly declining production volume to maintain $100. So in a weak consumption growth environment, $100 may be too high. And then you may have to move down to $80 to reduce supply growth from North America and to increase consumption growth and demand by consumers. And at the moment, it looks like that is maybe what we are about to see. The other side is, of course, supply disruption from the Middle East and North Africa, but I'm not going to talk about that because we have plenty of material from the next speakers on that topic. The other switch is, of course, that if you then start to see very robust growth globally, then you would need to move up to $100, $120 to get enough investments into additional supply in North America. I think it's interesting, in terms of electric cars, a lot of people talk about global warming. I don't think that is the biggest issue with electric cars. I think local pollution is a bigger issue and security of supply is a bigger issue. If you look at Chinese cities, local pollution is a big issue with the car park. If they can switch to electric, it would be very positive for the local environment. And you saw now recent decisions by the Chinese government that 30% of all cars which is going to be bought and used by the government is going to be electric. Now that's kind of a big decision. It's also industrial support for their own car industry on the electric side. But also, if you look on security of supply, we know that if China and India just continue on their path, China is going to be import dependent on oil up to like 85%, and India to 95%, or maybe 75% of China. But still, sort of, this is really not a situation that China or India really would like. So if they have another option of running transportation, personal transportation, on electric, if they could, they would. try to do that. I think that is one of the arguments for the Chinese government to do this support and do these decisions as well. So technology is going to be a very big issue in the oil market on the demand side. At the moment, we see prices under $100. Where is it going? It's a very two-sided market with surplus oil in the market, but at the same time extreme risk in the Middle East and North Africa. And with that, I leave the word to the next speaker.